Hello, everyone. The click of the lock was deafening. Would you like the next part of the story continued in the same tone? Like a verdict, the silence hit. Reporters scribbled madly, documenting every beat of the chaos. Cameras were banned, but a few cell phones, held low and discreet, captured the moment in shaky frames. Even the prosecutor, usually a picture of composure, looked rattled. This wasn't standard courtroom drama, this was personal. Karoline's attorney turned sharply toward the bench. Your Honor, we respectfully request a recess to address this ruling. Judge Whitaker didn't flinch. Denied. At the defense table, Pam Bondi quietly closed her folder. The motion was precise, controlled. Her face betrayed nothing, but her thoughts raced. He moved too fast, faster than I expected. That means he's lost his edge. He's not thinking anymore. He's reacting. The bailiff stepped toward Karoline, laying a hand gently on her arm, ready to lead her away. But Pam's eyes didn't leave the judge. She wasn't listening to his voice anymore. She was reading his tactics. And what she saw confirmed everything. This wasn't justice. This was theater. Judge Whitaker wasn't applying the law. He was putting on a show with one target, Karoline, and he had just overplayed his hand. Before the bailiff could move another inch, Pam stood. The energy in the room shifted instantly. You could feel it, like a current crackling through the air. Everyone turned. Pam didn't rush. She waited until every whisper died. Then, calmly, Your Honor, she said, her voice steady but cutting through the tension like a scalpel. The defense formally objects to this ruling. Judge Whitaker didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked amused. Your objection is noted. It does not change the finding. Pam offered a respectful nod. Understood. However, my colleague and I filed an emergency stay earlier this morning. It applies directly to any enforcement actions, including custody under contempt. Whitaker leaned back slightly, smirk threatening the corner of his mouth. There is no such stay in the record. Pam didn't blink. There is now. She reached into her folder and withdrew a stamped document, holding it aloft. Clerk, please enter this into the official record. The courtroom clerk stepped forward, took the papers, and began to read. Filed under Judge Matthew Harlan, U.S. District Court, Eastern District of Virginia, she read aloud. A low buzz rolled through the gallery. Even the prosecution leaned forward, suddenly uncertain. Whitaker's eyes flicked down to the document. They scanned the lines, paused. This was filed at 9:45 this morning, he said, tight-lipped. Pam didn't hesitate. Correct. Signed by Judge Harlan. The stay halts any contempt-related enforcement until a federal review is conducted. Whitaker's eyes darted to the clock. 10:02 a.m. He was cornered, and he knew it. Pam added, crisp and confident, We followed every federal procedure. This court is now bound by those limits. For a heartbeat, the courtroom felt upside down. The bench, the robe, the voice of authority, it all seemed hollow, shrinking. Finally, Whitaker spoke, his voice strained. We will recess for 10 minutes to review this filing. Crack! The gavel fell like a gunshot. The judge disappeared behind the heavy doors. But the tension didn't. The bailiff stood beside Karoline, unsure. Until instructed otherwise, he said quietly, the restraints remain. Karoline nodded. No surprise, no reaction. She wouldn't give Whitaker the satisfaction. Pam moved to her side, voice low, tone unwavering. You're not going anywhere. Karoline exhaled slowly, eyes forward. Calm, focused. Her attorney whispered behind them, voice taut with disbelief. Pam, the stay's airtight. There's no room for him to push back. Pam didn't answer. She didn't need to. The fight had just turned. An assistant district attorney approached, brow furrowed. You filed without notifying our office. Pam Bondi didn't even look up. Emergency procedure, she replied coolly. No notice required. The prosecutor's voice dropped. A decibel, half frustration, half disbelief. You could have given me a heads up. Pam's eyes met his, unflinching. This wasn't a courtesy filing, she said. It was necessary. Karoline glanced over at her. You filed this before today? She asked, voice low. Pam gave a single, deliberate nod. We anticipated this move. Karoline's voice slipped into a whisper. I didn't think he'd go this far. Pam's expression hardened. He was counting on that. Across the gallery, even the reporters felt the shift. This wasn't just a legal strategy. It was something sharper. Pam Bondi turning the letter of the law into a blade. And she wasn't done. The 10-minute recess ticked by like a countdown. The air was wired tight, the kind of tension that wrapped around your chest and refused to let go. Karoline sat beside Pam, the cuffs now gone, but the imprint of them, physical and psychological, still lingered. Everyone in that room knew. This wasn't over. Judge Whitaker returned, his robe trailing behind like a dark shadow. His face was composed, but the edge was dulled. His attempt to jail Karoline had backfired, publicly. Still, power rarely retreats without trying to reclaim something. The court acknowledges receipt of the emergency stay, Judge Whitaker announced, voice measured. In light of the stay, no enforcement actions regarding contempt will proceed at this time. A low murmur rolled through the courtroom. Pam didn't react. She knew the next move before it came. When a judge can't silence you physically, he will try to silence your credibility. Whitaker adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents before him like a man recalculating his attack. We will now proceed to the evidentiary portion of today's hearing, he said. The court notes the federal stay but will continue within its remaining jurisdiction. Karoline's attorney nodded cautiously. Pam stayed still, her focus razor sharp. The prosecution may call its next witness, Whitaker instructed. Assistant District Attorney Eric Samuels stood, his smile confident, too confident, like a gambler who believed the odds had finally turned in his favor. The prosecution calls Andrew Keller. A man in his early 40s rose from the gallery, neatly cropped hair, charcoal gray suit, wire-rimmed glasses, the uniform of a government technician who breathed numbers and spreadsheets. As Keller approached the witness stand, Pam leaned in toward Karoline. Her voice was calm but serious. Stay steady. This is his pivot. Karoline gave a subtle nod. Keller was sworn in, his demeanor clinical, almost mechanical. Please, state your name and position for the record, Samuels prompted. Andrew Keller, Senior Labor Market Analyst, U.S. Department of Labor. Samuels took a step forward, the rhythm of a rehearsed takedown in his posture. Mr. Keller, did you review the public remarks made by interview this February? Samuels asked. I did, Keller replied. Specifically her statements regarding projected job losses under proposed federal policies. And did you compare those statements against official Department of Labor data? I did. At the defense table, Pam Bondi's pen hovered above her notepad, motionless. She wasn't writing. She was listening. Samuels turned toward a nearby monitor. Mr. Keller, what did your review reveal? Keller stepped forward and tapped the screen. A graph appeared, 2 sets of bars in stark contrast. One representing Karoline's figures, the other, the department's official projections. Miss Leavitt's remarks estimated job losses at approximately 450,000, Keller said clearly. Our department's most conservative forecast was significantly lower, around 175,000. A ripple moved through the courtroom gallery. Reporters scribbled with renewed urgency. Some even mouthed the numbers in disbelief. Karoline kept her expression calm, but beneath the table, her fingers curled against her palm. Her pulse quickened. Samuels pressed forward, his voice casual but cutting. So, her figures significantly exaggerated the projected job losses? They did. By what percentage? Keller didn't hesitate. Over 150%. Pam leaned slightly toward Karoline, her voice a whisper. Don't react. Let them play it out. Karoline gave a tight nod, her jaw clenched. Samuels circled back toward the stand. In your expert opinion, were Miss Leavitt's statements factually consistent with the data from your department? No, Keller replied. The variance was substantial and misleading. The words hit like a hammer. For a moment, the courtroom held its breath. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, interest peaked. Samuels paused. He didn't need theatrics. The data spoke for itself. Then, with a glance at the defense table, no further questions. Judge Whitaker nodded. Defense may cross-examine. Daniel Reeves stood, calm and unhurried. His presence contrasted sharply with the prosecution's aggressive rhythm. Mr. Keller, he began, are you aware of the sources Miss Leavitt used to arrive at her job loss projections? No, Keller admitted. I was not provided with her sources. So it's possible, Reeves continued, that she relied on alternative models or projections? Keller hesitated, then nodded. It's possible. Reeves stepped closer. Would you also agree that economic projections, especially regarding job loss, can vary widely depending on the modeling assumptions used? Yes. And that federal data typically reflects national averages, while independent studies might focus on regional patterns or specific industries. That's also correct, Keller conceded. At the defense table, Pam allowed herself a faint, knowing smile. That was the opening they needed. Reeves continued, his tone steady. So while you disagree with her figures, you cannot definitively claim they were fabricated or knowingly false. Keller paused. The silence was sharp. I can't speak to her intent. Thank you. No further questions. Reeves returned to his seat with quiet confidence. Pam leaned toward Karoline, voice low but certain. He's soft. He won't be able to push their argument beyond data interpretation. Karoline gave a slight nod. Her hands relaxed. But Judge Whitaker wasn't done. Mr. Keller, he interjected suddenly, during your review, did you find any indication that Miss Leavitt consulted with labor economists or subject matter experts from any advocacy organizations informing her projections? Keller straightened. I have no such evidence. Whitaker nodded slightly. Very well. Pam's eyes narrowed, so this was the play. He was pivoting, shifting the focus from numbers to credibility. Not just questioning her math, but the method, the intent, the character. Pam sat back in her chair, spine straight, eyes fixed on Whitaker. If this was the ground he wanted to fight on, he'd just stepped onto her field. Would you like to continue the next phase of this hearing? It wasn't just about numbers anymore. The real strategy was unfolding. Whitaker wasn't attacking Karoline's data as much as he was laying the groundwork for something deeper, a suggestion of political coordination, a potential campaign, finance violation. Not just miscalculation, manipulation. Karoline's attorney saw it too. He scribbled something quickly on a legal pad and passed it to Pam. He's shifting to intent. Campaign ties. Pam read it, then calmly wrote back, let him. He's exposing his strategy. Around them, the courtroom's mood shifted. Reporters sensed the turn. What had started as a debate over statistics was morphing into something more personal, an unspoken question about Karoline's integrity. Judge Whitaker turned to Samuels. Does the prosecution wish to explore this line further? Samuels shook his head. Not at this time. That, in itself, was revealing. Whitaker gave a single nod. Very well. We'll proceed with the next witness after a brief recess. The gavel struck. Pam leaned toward Karoline, voice low but pointed. He just showed his hand. He can't jail you. He can't discredit your numbers outright. Now he'll go for optics. He'll try to imply you coordinated with political groups. Karoline's eyes were steady. Then we stop him there too. Pam smiled faintly. That's the plan. As the courtroom emptied, the journalists already knew what tomorrow's headlines would scream. Data under fire. Credibility in question. But Pam knew. The defense wasn't just still standing. It was about to strike back. When the courtroom reconvened, something had changed. Not outwardly. Judge Whitaker returned with the same measured expression, the same composed posture. But anyone watching closely would notice it. The rigidity in his shoulders, the tight set of his jaw. His first attempt, to jail Karoline for contempt, had failed. His second, to undermine her data, was slipping. But he wasn't finished. "Defense," Whitaker said. "You may proceed." Daniel Reeves stood smoothly, confident, controlled. "Your Honor, the defense calls our own labor market analysts to address the data variance cited by the prosecution." Whitaker gave a faint nod. "Proceed." Reeves turned to the gallery. "The defense calls Evan Patel." From the third row, a man in his early 30s rose. Clean gray suit, quiet confidence in his movements. As he approached the witness stand, he adjusted his tie and gave a respectful nod to the bench. Pam leaned toward Karoline. "He's ready." Karoline nodded back. She could feel it too, momentum shifting. But this wasn't the end of the fight. Not yet. Patel was sworn in and took his seat. "Please state your name and occupation for the record," Reeves began. "Evan Patel," he replied. "Independent labor economist and policy consultant. I specialize in regional labor market analysis." "And did you provide labor projections used by Miss Leavitt in her February interview?" "I did," Patel confirmed. "At her office's request, I conducted a region-specific study projecting potential job losses under the proposed federal policies. Were your findings consistent with the national averages published by the Department of Labor?" Patel shook his head slightly. "No. Our models projected significantly higher job losses because we incorporated regional factors and industry vulnerabilities specific to certain states." Reeves paced slowly in front of the bench. "Can you elaborate on those regional factors?" "Yes," Patel said. "Some areas are heavily reliant on industries like manufacturing and energy. The proposed federal policies would disproportionately affect those sectors. National averages tend to smooth out those extremes, but local impacts can be much higher." A visible wave of nods moved through the gallery. Analysts, reporters, even members of the prosecution shifted in their seats. Pam allowed herself a breath. Now they see it, the other side of the story. Karoline watched Patel calmly explain the nuance behind her numbers, the truth that the prosecution had tried to flatten into distortion. It wasn't exaggeration, it was context, and it was credible. Even the gallery could feel it. A few journalists exchanged glances. This was the explanation the prosecution hadn't wanted the public to hear. Reeves stepped forward, measured and calm. "Were your methods peer-reviewed or aligned with standard economic practices?" "They were," Patel said firmly. "Our methodology was published in full alongside the report. To date, no entity, including the Department of Labor, has challenged the integrity of our approach." At the defense table, Pam scribbled a single word onto her notepad: "Bulletproof." Reeves offered the faintest smile. "So, while Miss Leavitt's figures differed from federal estimates, they were based on a legitimate, transparent analysis?" "Correct." "And did you coordinate with any political organizations or advocacy groups while preparing this data?" "None whatsoever." "Were you compensated by any campaign or political entity?" "No. I was contracted strictly as an independent consultant." A stir moved through the courtroom. Reporters leaned forward. Even jurors, if only in the court of public opinion, registered the shift. Pam caught the prosecutor's expression, tight-lipped, brow taut, frustration blooming. Reeves closed his file with deliberate calm. "No further questions." Judge Whitaker nodded. "Prosecution, your witness." Eric Samuels stood, but the swagger was gone from his step. His earlier confidence had thinned into something uncertain. "Mr. Patel," he began, "would you agree that presenting significantly higher job loss figures than official federal data could create public confusion?" Patel remained even. Presenting data without context can always create confusion. That's precisely why our full methodology was made public. Samuels pushed, voice a notch sharper. Isn't it possible that such projections might mislead the public or be exploited for political purposes? Patel didn't blink. Any data can be misused or taken out of context. That risk exists with all public reports, including those issued by the Department of Labor. Pam allowed herself a small inward smile. They're reaching, she thought, and everyone in the room could see it. Samuels exhaled, cornered. No further questions. But Whitaker didn't dismiss the witness just yet. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, adjusting his glasses as he addressed Patel directly. Mr. Patel, did you at any point share your findings with any political advocacy groups or passees? Patel's brow furrowed. No, Your Honor. Did Miss Leavitt's office ever ask you to tailor the data to support a specific political narrative? Absolutely not. Pam's jaw tightened. There it was. The judge wasn't just questioning the numbers anymore. He was testing the waters, nudging towards something larger, a suggestion of intent, coordination, maybe even campaign finance violations. Karoline's attorney rose immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This line of questioning exceeds the scope of the current evidentiary review. Whitaker raised a hand to halt him. I'm merely clarifying the record. Pam leaned toward Karoline, her voice low. He's fishing. This is his new angle. Karoline's face remained composed, but the fire in her eyes sparked. Then we won't give him what he's looking for. As Patel stepped down, the shift was unmistakable. The prosecution had tried to discredit Karoline's data. The defense had countered with transparency, expertise, and calm. And Whitaker's latest pivot, toward insinuating political coordination, had been exposed before the accusation could fully take form. The gavel cracked like a thunderclap. We will adjourn for the day, Whitaker announced, his tone clipped, but neutral. Proceedings will resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. The courtroom buzzed as people stood, but under the shuffle of chairs and murmur of voices, a current of momentum had changed course. The prosecution was running out of plays, and Pam Bondi wasn't done. As the courtroom emptied, Pam Bondi remained seated, still and focused, her legal pad untouched. She hadn't written a word in the past hour. She didn't need to. Everything was already in motion. Karoline leaned toward her, voice low. What's his next move? Pam didn't look up. He'll pivot to coordination. If he can't challenge your facts, he'll try to smear your motives. She finally met Karoline's eyes, calm but unyielding. In our response, we don't follow. We stay 3 steps ahead, starting tonight. The last of the spectators filed out, their footsteps echoing off polished wood floors, afternoon shadows stretching long across the room. Some glanced back toward the defense table, unaware that the real battle hadn't played out in that courtroom. It was happening next. That evening, long after the courthouse had gone still, a different war room came alive, a private conference room in a nearby office building. No press, no statements, just strategy. Karoline sat at the head of the table, hands clasped, posture composed. But in her eyes, beneath the restraint, a fire burned. The kind that doesn't fade with fear. It sharpens in it. Daniel Reeves, her lead attorney, broke the silence. So, what's our next move? Do we go public with Whitaker's conduct? His bias is obvious. Pam shook her head. Not yet. Public pressure is noise. Judges dismiss noise. She pulled a slim black folder from her briefcase and laid it on the table. They can't dismiss process. She opened it, revealing a 3-page document. I've drafted a complaint for judicial misconduct. Karoline's brows lifted, slightly. Reeves leaned in. Based on what? Pam turned the pages one by one. 4 procedural violations, 2 during witness testimony, where he overruled objections that should have stood under state law. 1 during cross, disallowing a standard line of questioning. And this morning? That contempt ruling while defense, Evidence was still pending. She laid the final page flat. All verifiable, all breaches of judicial ethics. Karoline's communications advisor shifted uncomfortably. But won't filing this escalate things? Pam's eyes didn't flinch. Whitaker escalated when he tried to jail Karoline. He escalated again when he hinted at criminal coordination. This, she said, tapping the folder, isn't escalation, it's accountability. She leaned forward, voice razor steady. We're not going to the press. We're filing under seal with the Fourth Circuit Judicial Oversight Committee. Reeves exhaled, a calm settling over his features. Quiet, surgical. Pam nodded. No headlines, no drama, just the mechanism of the law. The table fell silent, strategy weighing heavy in the air. Then Karoline spoke. Will the Fourth Circuit take this seriously? Pam didn't hesitate. They'll notice, and if Whitaker keeps pushing, this complaint will already be moving through the system. The next morning, just after sunrise, Pam walked the quiet corridors of the federal courthouse's administrative wing. The halls were empty, the calm before the day's storm. She approached the clerk's desk and handed over a sealed envelope. This concerns a pending case in the Eastern District, she said. Judicial conduct inquiry. Please confirm receipt. The senior clerk opened the envelope just enough to glimpse the case heading. His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but enough. He nodded. Received and logged, Ms. Bondi. Pam offered a professional smile. Thank you. She turned and walked away, measured, unhurried. The defense wasn't just playing defense anymore. They had just moved to offense. Number and subject? Judge Douglas Whitaker, the clerk replied, stamping the cover sheet without fanfare. It will be forwarded immediately. Pam gave a single nod. No public notice, of course. That wasn't the point. She turned and walked away without another word. No cameras, no press, no statement. Just the silent weight of accountability shifting into motion, whether Judge Whitaker knew it or not. The next morning, Courtroom 4 filled once again. The crowd had thinned, fewer spectators, fewer reporters, but the air was heavier. Everyone who returned understood this was no longer a typical proceeding. This was a reckoning. Judge Douglas Whitaker entered promptly, his black robe trailing behind him like a curtain being drawn across yesterday's missteps. His expression was neutral, practiced, but those who knew what to look for saw it in his eyes. Pressure. We will resume proceedings, Whitaker said. His voice was sharp, but the edge was dulled, like a blade that had been used too often and too hard. Prosecution, your next witness. Eric Samuels stood. His earlier confidence had drained, replaced with the mechanical precision of someone trying to hold on to a script already unraveling. The prosecution calls Melissa Hayes. From the gallery, a woman in her early 30s rose, auburn hair pulled into a neat bun, her attire simple and businesslike. She walked with the composed efficiency of someone who thrived behind the scenes, not under lights. As she approached the witness stand, Karoline leaned in to Pam. She was the associate producer from my February interview. Pam gave a slight nod, eyes narrowing. She's important. Watch the tone. Melissa Hayes was sworn in and took her seat, back straight, voice steady. Samuels approached. Miss Hayes, please state your occupation for the record. I'm a segment producer for Capital Today, a political affairs program. And were you involved in the televised interview featuring Miss Leavitt this past February? I was. Samuels moved to the lectern, glancing down at his notes. Did you coordinate with Miss Leavitt's office prior to the interview? I handled standard scheduling communications. Date, time, transportation, studio logistics, Hayes replied. Samuels tried to sharpen his angle. Were any talking points provided by Miss Leavitt's team? Yes, general topic areas. She wanted to cover, nothing outside our typical process. He tugged at his tie, the thread beginning to slip. Did you or anyone on your production team receive any guidance or messaging from a political advocacy group or PAC connected to Miss Leavitt? Hayes blinked, confused, then frowned slightly. No. Samuels pressed, tension creeping into his voice. Are you certain? Yes. All pre-interview materials came directly from her office. A quiet ripple moved through the gallery. Reporters shifted, pens hovering just above their notebooks. Samuels leaned in, trying one more time. To your knowledge, did any political organization influence the content or direction of Miss Leavitt's interview? No, sir, Hayes said firmly. From the defense table, Pam leaned in to Karoline. He's losing the thread. Karoline didn't smile, but her expression steadied. Let him. Samuels's tone grew clipped. Were you aware of any coordination between Miss Leavitt and external political groups regarding the February appearance? Absolutely not. That landed. Samuels froze just for a beat, his carefully staged pivot from data disputes to implied political conspiracy was slipping through his fingers. No further questions, he muttered, retreating from the stand like a man who'd bet the house and lost the deed. Whitaker's eyes hadn't moved. His gaze remained locked on Hayes. But whatever he'd hoped this testimony would reveal, it hadn't materialized. Not today. Defense may cross-examine. Daniel Reeves rose smoothly. Miss Hayes, thank you for your clarity. To confirm, you were responsible for coordinating guest logistics and preparing segment outlines? Yes, she replied. And at no point did any party outside Miss Leavitt's staff or your production team influence the interview? Correct. Did your senior producers raise any concerns about the content or messaging of the segment before or after it aired? No, it was treated as a standard political interview. Reeves offered a polite nod. No further questions. As Hayes stepped down, the tension in the room subtly shifted. A murmur passed through the gallery, brief, restrained, but unmistakable. Pam scribbled a quick note and slid it across the table to Reeves. This was their linchpin. It just snapped. At the bench, Judge Whitaker's fingers drummed faintly against the wood. The courtroom felt it now, not just the defense, but the entire room. The prosecution's case wasn't just faltering, it was collapsing. Still, Whitaker wasn't ready to concede. He cleared his throat. The court acknowledges Miss Hayes' testimony as relevant, but not dispositive. The burden remains with the defense to explain the discrepancies between Miss Leavitt's statements and federal labor data. Pam leaned in toward Karoline. He's retreating into procedural language. That's a defensive move. Karoline gave a slow nod. And tomorrow? Pam's expression was resolute. Tomorrow we push harder and let the record speak. The gavel struck. We will recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow, Whitaker announced. As the courtroom emptied, Pam remained seated a moment longer, eyes scanning the prosecution table, the bench, the press gallery. They weren't just defending anymore. They were winning. The following morning, Courtroom 4 felt transformed. Gone was the buzz of cable crews and frantic typing of live bloggers. The air was still, the gallery sparse. Just those who understood that in law, the quiet moments are often the most decisive. Judge Douglas Whitaker entered without ceremony, his presence subdued, the usual confidence in his stride noticeably dimmed. This court, he began, voice steady but dulled, has reviewed all testimony, documentation, and closing statements presented over the course of these proceedings. Pam sat perfectly still. Karoline leaned forward slightly, hands, clasped, expression calm. Whitaker continued. While discrepancies in labor projections remain, no evidence has been presented to demonstrate deliberate or coordinated falsehoods on the part of Miss Leavitt. There it was. A soft wave of reaction passed through the gallery. Shoulders eased, breath released. Even the prosecution team slumped subtly in their chairs. But Whitaker wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court finds no basis to impose sanctions or pursue disciplinary action. Pam exhaled, quiet and composed. No smile, no fist pump, just the measured control of someone who had planned for this outcome long before the courtroom ever filled. Karoline's attorney leaned over. "We're clear." But Whitaker added, almost as an afterthought, "This court, however, remains concerned about the tone and approach taken by Miss Leavitt during her testimony. Decorum must be maintained." A final jab, but a hollow one. Pam didn't flinch. She didn't need to. The case was over, and they had won. Before anyone else could speak, Pam rose confidently. "Your Honor, with all due respect, those concerns were already addressed and dismissed under the federal stay. They cannot factor into any conclusions or public statements." Judge Whitaker's gaze hardened for a moment, but he offered no rebuttal. "This hearing is concluded," he declared at last. The gavel struck. This time, the sound didn't belong to the judge alone. It echoed as a symbol of finality and quiet victory. As the courtroom emptied, Pam gathered her notes silently. Karoline leaned in and asked softly, "Is that really the end?" Pam shook her head slightly. "It's the end of his part. Ours continues." Across the city, in the administrative wing of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, the judicial complaint Pam had filed days earlier was already moving forward. Though sealed from public view, insiders knew the review was underway. By the following week, the outcome was clear, but only to those who needed to know. Judge Whitaker submitted his notice of early retirement. No press conference, no official statement, just a brief memo. "Effective immediately, I will conclude my tenure on the bench. I remain proud of my years of service." The Fourth Circuit never released the full findings. They didn't need to. The message was unmistakable. Pam and Karoline agreed. No public comments, no interviews, no victory laps. The press filled the silence. Headlines read, "Leavitt clears the way. Bondi's legal strategy forces judicial review. No evidence of misconduct found." Across editorial pages and legal blogs, consensus emerged. They hadn't just won a case. They had proven that process and principle could still triumph over power. On a quiet afternoon, Pam and Karoline met one last time before returning to their regular lives. "You handled this with restraint," Pam said. "That's rare, and it mattered." Karoline smiled faintly. "I had the right counsel." Pam shook her head with a knowing smile. "No, you had the right principles. I just made sure." The law caught up. They gathered their things, neither speaking of the judge again. They didn't need to. As the final gavel fell, Karoline Leavitt stood tall, not just because she was cleared, but because she never stood alone. Beside her, Pam Bondi proved that resilience and strategy could outlast even the strongest opposition. What about you? Have you ever faced a battle where standing firm made all the difference? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. If this journey inspired you, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories where courage and truth lead the way. Thank you for watching.